What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the podcast. Today, we got an excellent show. We got a guest in the studio, Javier Bastardo. He is a Forbes contributor, Bitfinex ambassador. Is that right?
Yes.
And he is here to talk about everything, IMF, Bitcoin, El Salvador, his journey over here from Venezuela. And so, Javier, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, Michael. It's a really great pleasure. And well, let's dive into the IMF and El Salvador stuff.
Awesome. So listen, you're a reporter for Forbes. You've been writing about this. What can you tell us? First of all, can you set it up for us, like as far as from the beginning to where we're at now? Is that something you could do?
The beginning is in 2021 when El Salvador announced the Bitcoin law and it came to life, making El Salvador really important. As much as we are here in El Salvador speaking about it, and it's like a country that became central to the global Bitcoin community, so it's that important. So in 2021, the Bitcoin law started to be actually a law. And since that moment, the IMF has been against it. And the stance for El Salvador, I think that in that moment was really clear against the IMF, but right now, a few years after, and I think that in the middle of a financial moment that is not that good, in which they need money, they have changed a little. So the Bitcoin law, as we all know, made Bitcoin legal tender here in El Salvador, so you can trivially pay for stuff here that it's really important, and also made it possible to pay tax with Bitcoin. That is a really interesting part of it. And these two are now gone in the law in 2025. The modifications that the law had in late January, at the end of January, made legal tender-ish Bitcoin now. So
it's questionable.
Exactly. And then you start seeing that there are some tricky parts of this, because obviously the agreement is in a really high level. So everything that we have is public information, and the speculations that we are doing or the interpretations that we are doing around it. And then the most common accepted ways of the definitions of legal tender are that it's compulsory. So nobody can deny a payment in that thing, in this case in Bitcoin. And then that you can actually liquidate any kind of debts, in tax included. So both are removed now. And then these modifications to that law made Bitcoin like a de facto currency here. You can still pay with it, and it's still there are not capital taxes. So
Capital gains taxes on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's really important. But right now, it's not strictly a legal tender if you go to the main definition.
Okay, so there's a couple things here. The first thing is, when I hear this, I think that's what made El Salvador interesting from my perspective, was that you had a jurisdiction, you had a government here fully embracing Bitcoin as a currency, as a legal tender, going so far even to allow you to pay taxes with it. Therefore, almost creating conditions that one could imagine not having to enter the fiat system. They could continuously operate in Bitcoin. And, as vendors started accepting it, or as the economy grew larger and larger, you could imagine that more goods and services would be available to you over time, just because of that whole setup. And you wouldn't have to escape the Bitcoin circular economy. You could always operate in that and not have to venture off into the fiat world. Now that comes into question. Like, I've had a couple people reach out to me and say, hey, the fact that I can't pay taxes means that now I have to enter the fiat system. And that's something that I wasn't signing up for, which was interesting. The other thing there is that I think the fact that El Salvador was a country whose government totally embraced the Bitcoin ethos made it stand out, because, you have Bitcoin circular economies all over the world. You have grassroots movements all over the world. And so what made El Salvador stand out was just their stance on Bitcoin from the government level. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. And I think that back to 2021, the defiance in a way of what the IMF was trying to impose to El Salvador in that moment was really important, because you see that the, let's say, bet on Bitcoin or the Bitcoin project wasn't just like a thing that you just said. It was like a real decision, like they were embracing Bitcoin radically. But I think that the times change, and also you you have to evaluate the size of the El Salvador's economy. So obviously, if you can, as they are doing, accumulate Bitcoin and try to bet on the future, it's like long periods of time. It's not like from a year to another. And also that the market's condition, for example, for Bitcoin bonds, that was another important idea and was another important part of what the 2021 law brought to the Bitcoin community globally. You see that maybe the market appetite today is not enough to cover all the necessities that the country has. And to me, it's easier for El Salvador to negotiate with a multilateral organization and give up something that maybe is really important to us, because at the end we came because of the Bitcoin law. It's my case too, but that is not as significant as it could be to get the money and solve the problem that they will solve with it. And also that it unlocks not only more loans and more access to capital, but also it gives the country a new, I don't know, like idea of being regularized in the eyes of the most fiat minds. Because at the end, obviously, for us, embracing the Bitcoin ethos and trying to help and support Bitcoin communities and so on is really important for a government. But the fiat system is still being bigger than what we can do, and also is bigger than what El Salvador can stand for. And the things that it could access to build its own future maybe were big enough to say, okay, we need to change a little the project. And I think that they're still supporting Bitcoin. Yeah, it's okay, you need to explain more and there are more details there. But what they gave up and what they are supposed to get from that, I think that is bigger in terms of, okay, maybe we can go this way and kept building the future that they are trying to build by themselves.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind when I listen to Bukele, when I hear his speeches, when I look at his moves, that this is all calculated, right? You weigh the trade-offs. And I think for him, he looked at the situation and said, okay, well, we're going to have to soften our stance against the IMF a little bit in order to get what we want so this country can prosper. There's no doubt in my mind that this is all very calculated risks and very calculated deals being made. But it's interesting now, though, because there seems to be a mismatch in narratives, right? The IMF is making all types of demands on El Salvador in order to receive these loans. And from what I can see is that they're complying. They're complying. They've changed the Bitcoin law and they're complying in other ways. And one of the demands that we're seeing now is the fact that El Salvador needs to stop accumulating Bitcoin. Like they can have the Bitcoin that they've accumulated, but they can no longer add to their reservoir unless it comes from like seizure through illegal activities or something like that, right? But Bukele's narrative on Twitter is much different, right? It is that they're not going to stop and they're going to defy the IMF. Can you add some clarity as to what do you think is happening there? Because it's confusing
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit.
It's also confusing to me that I've been reporting about this since the very beginning, but now following the last month, and obviously it's three things like the facts, what are the actual facts, the narrative from the IMF, and the El Salvador's narrative. Like you have three different things that are supposed all to relate to the facts, but that not always do. And then there's a big gap for of information that I think that is something that maybe we are missing a little, like the government being absolutely clear as they were, because at the beginning it was like getting popular support among the Bitcoin community, and at the end with the modification it could be the same, because we are not demanding you to keep the Bitcoin law and only do Bitcoin stuff, because at the end it's not a Bitcoin company, or it's not a Bitcoin project. It's a country, you know.
Yeah. So, for my take on this is that the Bitcoin law or the rescinding of the Bitcoin law or parts of it wasn't a big deal. What matters is the fact that you could still use it as a currency over here, therefore allowing the grassroots movements and circular economies to still flourish, and that the government basically stays out of the way of Bitcoiners and what they want to do. And some Bitcoiners even cheered on parts of the law that were rescinded, because the idea that the government can impose for someone else to take a currency kind of goes against the voluntarious nature of Bitcoin, right? And so, in that regard, I think that El Salvador still could be considered a Bitcoin country, even though that they rescinded aspects of the law, because parts of it weren't really in line with the Bitcoin ethos in anyways.
Then if they maybe were as clear as they were at the beginning regarding these changes, we don't have to report that much, and we don't have to explain that much or trying to interpret that much. That's the main observation that I have there. And what is happening right now is, as I said, you have the facts that are supposed to be in the documents, and the latest one coming from the IMF, it was in March 3. And it's a staff report that contains a letter of intent that is signed by El Salvador's authorities. It's the central bank president and the minister of finance both signed that letter of intent, so they are aware. This is not something that is happening without El Salvador knowing. Or I saw some post saying that we don't know if El Salvador really wants the loan, but well, at least for the letter of intent, we know that they are trying to negotiate. They are offering what they can leave or what changes can be done, and they are already agreed to this specific thing that is the Bitcoin accumulation. So it's supposed to stop, and then it's where it starts to get tricky. And it's like, in general, if they can be more specific, it could be good. But it's the IMF document said that they shouldn't buy more Bitcoin with the public sector money or through public sector entities. And there are some entities that are mentioned: the AAB, that is the Bitcoin Administration Office, something like that, the Bitcoin Office. And there are other few that are mentioned specifically as entities, public entities related to Bitcoin. And these entities also need to disclose to the IMF the wallets that they have, even if it's cold storage or if it's a hot wallet, they need to disclose that data to the IMF. So it's clear that they say that can buy more Bitcoin to add to those wallets. So they can buy more Bitcoin for the reserve. It's not exactly that. They can buy more Bitcoin through the public sector. So that's what I wrote like yesterday regarding a question that I asked to the IMF regarding tweet from Bukele. Bukele said, "We are not stopping, it will continue," and so on. And I asked, okay, so this contradicts the agreement. So it seems that this you can't buy through the public sector, leave a little space in which they can keep adding. I didn't say buying, but adding. How? I don't know, but
Well, that's a question that we got here. I asked for questions on my Twitter, and one of them was like, can you expand on how else they can continue to add to their Bitcoin public wallet balance if they can't buy? And, this is from John Dennehy, and what he's saying is that what is it possible that maybe someone's contributing through a donation, or whether they're just transferring Bitcoin from another wallet, which they had that wasn't disclosed? Is that possibility?
it's not that clear, but that's what I tried to explain a little in the article, that maybe in this space in which you are not supposed to buy, you can add. There's this space in which you can add in different ways that are not buying nor mining, that are prevented and explicitly prevented in the staff document and the agreement in general. And then what it really gives to me, this is a comment from the IMF, like it's literally what they said. Let me take the quote so we can go a little over it. It's also the answer about if adding or making the reserve bigger or whatever way you say, but not buying breaks the deal. It's the government, and this quote, the government under the program has committed not to accumulate further Bitcoins at the level of the overall public sector. That's what we've been saying, like they can accumulate further Bitcoins. And we consult with the authorities, and they have assured us that the recent increase in Bitcoin holdings in the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Fund is consistent with the agreed program conditionality.
Interesting.
Okay.
So they're basically saying like they can't buy more Bitcoin with public funds, but the Bitcoin that they are accumulating right now is consistent with that. So it kind of leads one to believe that, okay, they're accumulating these Bitcoin through some other means, but they're not necessarily buying them, which would mean that this could be from private donor or something like that,
A
right?
private donation, a private entity that is acquiring in the name of El Salvador. I don't know if that's feasible, but that's another option. Maybe reassignation of assets. Let's say that you can change some of the deposits that you have to BTC denominated sheet. I don't know. Like you can have. There's this space of flexibility that's at the end what I think that it's happening here. Like the agreement is a done deal. They already were supposed to receive over $100 million regarding the $1.4 billion that the IMF is granting. That also unlocks over 3.5 billion. So it's good money for El Salvador. And the agreement is done, and these new developments regarding if they are prohibited or it's forbidden or there's a chance to keep accumulating seems to be aligned with the deal. So it seems that there are some flexibility, or there is this little room that they left in the negotiation that will, as I understand, leave them or keep them to buy more Bitcoin in the futures. And I guess that's why Bukele could say openly that it's not stopping, because they have this path that it's not as clear through the documents, but then you have like, okay, the clarification that made it easier. So everything that we just discussed could be clearer for everyone if they just said, okay, this is what's happening. This is what we are living in the table. These are the changes, and we're still Bitcoin country. That okay, you still like, but this other information could be good for us to have. And at the end, it's like we are foreigners living in a different country, and maybe we don't have like the right to ask for that, but it could be better, I
Sure.
guess.
So you're saying for the Bitcoin community, some clarity would be.
Yes, because what you see in Twitter and the comments regarding this is they are, I don't know, I feel betrayed or this is bad for Bitcoin or so. Okay. Yeah, maybe, but it's also related to a sovereign state doing things the way that they want. Like, yeah, we're living here and we're supporting the Bitcoin thing happening here in El Salvador, but at the end, still, they can do what they feel and they want to do in order to build their future. I just wanted maybe more clarity, but well, it's the information that you have. Okay,
Yeah. I
and
mean,
it allowed me to write more. Like I had three different articles. Like the IMF said this, then Bukele said this, and now this is what they. Yeah, and it's good, but okay.
yeah, I guess the only issue I see here is, well, first of all, I mean, there are plenty of issues, but as far as like the Bitcoin community here, like, should we care about this? How much does this actually impact us and stuff like that? The problem is when there isn't clarity, it just leaves all these rumors and speculation and people talk and, morale gets impacted and so forth. And like, there's people that came here, moved their families here, switched up their plans in life to be on board with this journey here, because the signals that were coming out of El Salvador were very clearly that this is a country that embraces the Bitcoin ethos. They were moving towards volcano bonds and they were moving towards a Bitcoin city. And I don't know if that's still going on, but last I heard is they haven't broken ground and the volcano bonds kind of got, pushed to the side or abandoned completely. And, so now you have mixed signals as far as like what direction this country is going towards. And so that's the only problem I see in terms of like the Bitcoin law and having to deal with the IMF and all of that stuff. Like you said, it's a sovereign nation. And I think that the well-being of this country comes first. And I think most Bitcoiners understand that. But in terms of like having a little bit of clarity as far as what the Bitcoin strategy is going forward, of course, it would be nice to get like an official source to provide that clarity.
But then that's what I said earlier, that you have these three things: the facts, there are changes, the IMF narrative that we just discussed, and the El Salvador narrative, that it's mainly through the Bitcoin office, and the official stance is still Bitcoin country. And then let's go a little into it. Okay, it's not legal tender in a strict way of defining legal tender, but still you can still pay with Bitcoin here. And there's no capital gain taxes. That is really important in order to actually can pay. And if you go to the reaction of the projects and leaders of projects that are already happening here regarding those changes, many of them said that it's okay and it doesn't affect their program in Berlin, in El Sonte, and so on. So, okay, in reviewing the Bitcoin office narrative, El Salvador is still Bitcoin country in that way. Then with the Bitcoin bonds and so on, they didn't say anything about that, but in the IMF documents, there are some actual almost prohibition or preventing them of issuing any kind of debt that is Bitcoin linked or Bitcoin denominated. So it's really almost like saying don't do the Bitcoin bonds. It's not tokenized debt or something like that. That implies that the public sector is the one that is the debtor. So it's kind of saying that don't do the Bitcoin bonds. But nobody's asking about that, and it seems that it doesn't. It's not making that many headlines as the Bitcoin reserve. So it's okay. And as I said before, maybe the market doesn't have the same appetite for Bitcoin bonds that it could have in 2021. And then the Bitcoin accumulation, as we said, it seems that it's in a good zone, so they can keep actually accumulating. It seems so. I'm not 100% sure, but as far as the information that I got from the
I
IMF,
think they are. So for my perspective, if Bukele says that they're going to keep on accumulating, I think they are. I just think that they're not going to be buying it. I think that there's going to be some workaround in the background, but in terms of like the public balance going up, I think that's going to continue to
exactly.
happen.
Entonces, and then you have the official El Salvador narrative that if you see, then there are some information that you need to add, but in general is accurate. Like the information that the Bitcoin office is sharing, as we said, these little things that you have to explain, but at the end they are saying, and that's the official narrative. Like the official communication is that they are not stopping the Bitcoin accumulation, that the Bitcoin country is still being a thing, that is legal tender, and legal tender with quotes, but it's what, and where is like the change of what the country offered, maybe a little on the clarity and the straightforward process that it was before, and then it left bigger room for private organizations or NGOs or even companies to take over what is happening here. So it relies on the community. Is the community going to, I don't know, step up and take the lead on the Bitcoin adoption in El Salvador? Are we really, or maybe did we really move here to build the El Salvador on the Bitcoin?
I think the biggest thing here now in terms of that, right? That question is the IMF is now here, right? And so the IMF has a negative image, right? And this is not anything new, right? Like when I hang out with Max Kaiser, I never heard someone talk so horrible about an organization, right? And Max Kaiser just laid it out. Like, and same thing with John Dennehy, with Me Premier Bitcoin. So the only thing that changes from my perspective is now El Salvador is in bed with the IMF. And it's like that impacts the thought process as far as, how much do I now align with what's happening here in El Salvador, and how much does this now go kind of against my ethos? And it's a question now that I think that people are asking, and they're going to have to come to their own conclusions. Do you kind of see it like that as well?
Yeah. And I think that maybe could be explained with what we did in January with Bitfinex. We did a financial freedom tour here in El Salvador that is inspired on a project that we did in Turkey, thanks to Steve Group there in Turkey. So I participate there, and I wanted to do the same here. And obviously, the company were really happy to complete this here. And it was a really few days before the law changes were announced at the end of January. So we were aware that the changes were coming because the agreement was announced on December, even in October last year. Then in December, it was actually signed by the IMF board. So we knew since December that the changes were coming, but still we wanted to do the financial freedom tour here to see what is happening among different communities, visiting Berlin and El Sonte and Zacatecoluca, where Napoleon is. And what we had there is interest for people to know more about Bitcoin, and also the leaders of those communities and projects saying that it's nothing changed for them. And that's really inspiring for us, because we know that, and we address it, that the change were coming. We also did a documentary that it's coming in a few time. I can't say how long, But in that we try to address the change, but also see what is happening. And as you can experience by yourself, it's the interest in Bitcoin, the opportunities that Bitcoin could enable still being there. Like nothing changed in a way that it's killing the project 100%. No, it's simply, at least for what we could experience, is simply a little step in the same movement of building a better El Salvador that's still going to need Bitcoin and Bitcoin advocates to help to keep growing, because education will be still being needed, as John Dennehy is saying, because he's complaining and criticizing the IMF deal, but also saying that we are going to keep building. And I think that that's the feeling that we experimented before the changes, and I think that it's the same right now. Now we have more clarity on what is going to happen, and let's see if the community, as we said, step up and build more.
Have you noticed, since you're a resident here and stuff like that, have you noticed some people leaving or some people getting down, or what's the general sentiment from your point of view?
I saw like publications on X saying that people were denied to pay in Bitcoin their rent.
Mm-hmm.
That's really bad. But well, at the end, you can deal and negotiate with your landlord and something like that. And also, obviously, I saw comments of people saying that they are feeling that it's not good enough to be here and to bet in El Salvador now that the changes are done and the relation with the IMF is closer. So obviously, if you are mainly in online with Bitcoin and what Bitcoin offers, maybe the change are enough to make you doubt. But if you are trying to bet on El Salvador as a country that can build a brighter future, it's still the same positive
Outlook.
Yeah. In
Yeah.
general, people are really positive in general.
Awesome. So that's cool. I mean, I think that summarizes a lot of where we're at here. It's going to be interesting. The only thing with this IMF thing and why it's still in the news is because it seems like every time there's a new reveal, it's like more demands, more restrictions, and more clarity as far as what the IMF is requiring El Salvador to do within Bitcoin, and it gets worse and worse and worse. So that's one of the reasons why it's stayed relevant. It hasn't been like this one thing where you rip the Band-Aid off, okay, and then it's done. But I think we tackled it thoroughly. Is there anything else that you want to add before we get into your story? I want to hear more about you.
Maybe Chivo. That's also, I know many people, and I agree too. It's not that good as a product, and it's kind of good that the government will need to leave it. But to me, it was like the main infrastructure for average Salvadorian to get used to Bitcoin. So hopefully it won't be like just gone, and they need to audit, and they need to give the IMF some finance documents related to it. So it will be really interesting to see if anything else comes out of the auditories or whatever. Could be interesting, because at the beginning it was really problematic. People lost money, or the KYC wasn't that good,
I mean, I had to deal with Chivo as, trying to create a startup here, run retreats and stuff like that, and work with vendors. And it was problematic. And so I could see how Bitcoiners would say, okay, that going into the hands of a private organization is a good thing. And I always found it kind of weird too that the government was involved in to that degree and to that regard. But I guess it's because they wanted to onboard their citizens, and the way to do that, with the $30 that they were giving out in Bitcoin, the way to do that, I guess you needed to have a publicly held Bitcoin wallet. Chivo was the way to do that. But looks like that's going away, and it's going to be interesting. Do you think we're going to get any more news? Any more bombshells coming out of this?
Specifically from the agreement, I guess no, because everything was more or less addressed, and the main change to the law are already under. I guess that they need to be published on the National Gazette and so on. But besides that, I guess that this is the worst moment in terms of communications that they will face. And well, let's see, because in the staff report, there are some deadlines that are supposed to be met. Maybe when the second deadlines that are in end of June and end of July, maybe there we're going to see some news. Maybe, I don't think so. But the final deadline for all the demands are all the different issues that the IMF suggested to be changed, because we are only speaking about Bitcoin related ones, but there are some that are related to the fiscality and so on. Everything should be done by the end of this year. So probably by the end of this year, we are going to fully understand what are the changes and the real impact and so on. But I guess that this is the
This is the most of it.
Yeah. This was the most.
All right, so let's move on from the IMF and El Salvador. Let's talk about you and your origin story, right? You're from Venezuela. You started a community there as well. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm originally from Venezuela, from Caracas, and I started a Bitcoin-only community in October of 2019. I remember even the date. It was October 5th. We did the first Bitcoin-only meetup in Caracas. It was really cool because before Satoshi in Venezuela, that is the name of the community, there was Bitcoin Venezuela, that was a community that were launched before us, and that also were focusing mainly on donations and helping people and so on. So for me, it was trying to fill the void that they left, because the founders left the country, and the community Bitcoin Venezuela went really low. And also try to help people to understand why Bitcoin was important in a context of inflation and hyperinflation. That was what we were living when I started using Bitcoin. But before before launching this community, as I'm doing right now with Forbes, writing articles and so on, it was the way in which I get introduced to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in that moment. Because in 2017, if you are a Venezuelan, you probably recall that 2016 was the worst moment of the hyperinflation and so on. But in 2017, I started writing articles for a Venezuelan website called cryptonoticias.com. And I really didn't know anything about Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies. It was the first time that
When was this? What year?
2017.
2017.
It was the first time that I read the word Bitcoin, that I listened to decentralization, blockchain, cryptocurrencies. My background is in philosophy. I studied philosophy in the college, but it is not that much related to cryptocurrencies. Maybe the value or the way of seeing things that you have from philosophy maybe allow you to see Bitcoin as a valid model of money, or as a valid model of trust in a way. But like, my background is not at all related to it. But I keep like reporting and writing. Then I started also writing for Cointelegraph en Español, that is the Cointelegraph Spanish version. And then I started working with different companies, like doing mainly content, trying to help them to.
Can I ask you, because I'm just curious about your journey then as a Bitcoiner? How long did it take you to kind of figure out the value proposition and the ethos?
It took me a while, because at the beginning it was just a job that I needed to do, because it was really horrible. The situation in the country was really horrible. And I started the 2017 with one job, and I ended that year with four. And this was like, okay, I need a better paid work. And that's why I started writing this article. So to me, it was just a job, and it was a necessity, like get the money and that's it. And then it was really popular, the blockchain, but what I thought that was the value proposition of every all this that I was reading was blockchain. To me was decentralization. We are going to change everything.
Put everything on a blockchain.
Yeah. But then I started to read that these projects, ICOs, initial coin offerings, were under delivering. So the supposedly blockchain future and tokens and so on were not that good at the end. And then I think that what changed forever for me was interviewing Giacomo Succo for Crypto Noticias.
Oh yeah.
And we did a really long interview, and I recall asking him if he wants everybody to know about crypto. He said, no, I don't want everybody to know about crypto. I want them to know about Bitcoin. And that differentiation, because we were writing like Bitcoin and crypto and blockchain were all the same in the newspaper. At the end, they also learn a lot about why Bitcoin matters, and I think that Crypto Noticias is really good in that point of view among different media outlets. But we were learning like, okay, the blockchain was the dominant narrative in that moment, but it wasn't the main thing. And to me, that interview was the big thing that clarified a lot. And then I say, okay, Bitcoin is what remains. It's the only project that ICOs get bust and so on, but Bitcoin is still there. It goes down in price because, you know, at the beginning it was under 1K when I started looking at Bitcoin. At the end of that year, it was almost 20K. And then it went down horrible in 2018. But you say, okay, it's still working. You can still go and see the transactions on a block explorer. Miners are doing really good in Venezuela because I was in Venezuela at that moment. So what is going on here? And I started to, okay, trying to understand better, like learning and focusing more on Bitcoin. And then it clicked, okay, this is like what I was thinking in that moment, like this is the mother of all this movement. All the other products relay somehow to Bitcoin. So the real important one is Bitcoin, no all the other flavors of it. And then obviously being in the context of currency that you can see bills on the streets and so on, like garbage, and then you compare it to something that is capped to only 21 million, and then you say, okay, it's like the gold, you know, like there's not that much gold. Maybe it could really be better than what I'm used to use. And then the Safety Amos book,
The Bitcoin standard.
the Bitcoin standard. I was thinking in the name in Spanish. It was like a really good read for me to like understand the economical proposition of it. Like I didn't really thought that much about it, but it was like another layer to the understanding. And then I said, okay, we need to actually create something to make more Venezuelans to understand Bitcoin. And that's when I created Satoshi in Venezuela.
That's the rabbit hole journey.
Yeah. And then, as I said, it was at the end of 2019. So you know what happened in 2020? We had the COVID thing. And what we were doing was traveling around Venezuela, doing different meetups in different cities. Because at the beginning I thought, okay, maybe there are a lot of people that are going to come here and they want to learn and so on. And it was really depressing to see that people like are in need. They need money. There's not like I'm going to a Bitcoin meetup for the sovereignty or the censorship
It's for
resistance.
survival.
Yes, yes. And it was really touching to know people that thought that I was going to teach them how to make money. I was trying to teach them why this kind of money is good, but not like we're.
Yeah, man, it's hard to teach people about the value proposition of Bitcoin, especially as a savings technology, when they're just focused on the next day and how to get the next meal. And I would imagine it's a similar situation that happened here in El Salvador, where um, it's hard to hard to get people to think in that perspective when they're just worried about eating.
Yeah. And then I tried to change a little what we were doing, focusing more on in Caracas, like trying to only do the meetups in the capital, but then everything was suspended, like no public gatherings, no meetings, no anything. So we changed the model to Zoom calls
Mm-hmm.
or Jitsi calls in that moment, trying to use open source and so on. And people were started saying to me, you need to record this, it's really good, like, but I can join live, I need the recording so I can watch it afterwards. And we turned the meetups into a podcast.
Oh,
So I
awesome.
did Hablemos de Bitcoin, that
Mm.
it's Let's Talk Bitcoin, from 2020, like mid 2020 until 2023.
Mm-hmm.
I had like Adam Back or Michael Saylor, like the biggest names that we had, but the idea was the same, like trying to replicate this experience of a meetup in a podcast format or something like that. And it was really good. Like in the previous cycle, I got like 4 sponsors, something like that, and was really good because there wasn't that many people creating Spanish content and so on. Right now, we have plenty of good content creators,
Mm-hmm.
and there wasn't a Bitcoin only, podcast that was from Latin America, because you have a Lunaticoin that is from Spain that also speak to the Spanish speaking audience, but it's not from Latam. So I was like the other one in Latin America. It was a really good experience, and it also helped me to meet people that right now are big names in the industry, but or the discover projects that were just starting and right now they're like known. I recall to interview
Mm-hmm.
Roman Martinez from Bitcoin Beach, and they were really happy because I was interviewing them. And right now you see them trying to build a global community and a global movement. It's really good to. I recall looking at them and saying, okay, this guy have really great potential, and it was really a nice experience. And then I moved here, and it all stopped because now I'm not in Venezuela, so it's not the same, and also the situation there is not that good
Mm.
in terms of organizing activities. Since the regime broke the last elections, it's weird to meet with people. That's the things like they even search into your phone to see what you have. So
Wow. So the situation in Venezuela has gotten worse in terms of like political, political authoritarianism and so forth. Would you?
yeah. And at the beginning, for me, talking about Bitcoin was also a way of talking about freedom to people
A
there.
Trojan horse.
Yeah. And I had a bad experience in, for example, in Maracay, that is a city outside of Caracas, and I have some police guys like trying to
Harass you?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because I in the meetup that day I was talking shit about the Petro. That was the pseudo shitcoin that the government created. At the end, it was horrible, and it is nothing right now, just a corruption nest. But in that moment, talking badly about that was as bad as they sent me police guys to try
Wow.
to. So yeah,
It's a weird environment to operate in, you know, and it's interesting because being here in Latin America, you kind of feel that. Like you feel not necessarily here in El Salvador, you know, Bukele's has promoted free speech. You have Rumble coming here and so forth. But like, what's different here is that you feel the proximity to politics, to power, so to say. Like Bukele lives right down the street. You see his motorcade going everywhere and stuff like that, and that's a relatively new thing. And so, yeah, it's interesting.
yeah, and then I did some activities here in 2021, like meetups and so on, and I connected to a lot of spaces trying to answer questions for Salvadorians. They even told me like Rata Bukeleana, like it's like Bukelean rat, because I was supposed to be sponsored by Bukele when I first came here. I tried to support Bitcoin. Like I'm Bukele is the president and so on, but like what took me to El Salvador was Bitcoin,
Okay,
not
yeah,
him.
that's what was my next question. What
And
brought you here? Like, what was the decision to come here?
try to replicate what we were doing with Satoshi in Venezuela here
Mm-hmm.
in El Salvador. And Mi Primer Bitcoin wasn't what it is today when I first came here.
Mm-hmm.
I recall having Napoleon Osorio in one of the meetups that we did. And he was explaining that he was part of this project, but he was the first one, if you remember and know his history. And what we or what I wanted to do was to replicate the same, and I did meetups here in San Salvador, in El Tunco, in El Sonte, meeting with people. That's what I know. Almost everybody that is doing projects or is part of the community, because at the beginning I organized that community, and at the end it wasn't necessary. Like everybody was really involved, and that's what brought us in general here to what we have today with Mi Primer Bitcoin, Node Nation, people in Santa Ana, obviously Bitcoin Berlin, El Sonde that keeps growing even as a global movement. So it's really nice to look back and say, okay, I remember the early days of these guys.
Yeah, it's cool to see just in general, like, you know, seeing people's progress in their life goals and seeing projects evolve and seeing how far they've come along and so far. That's been just interesting. And I could imagine here, because it's such fertile ground, right? It's fresh. There's so much development yet to happen here. It's like to see these projects, see these people emerge into their potential is really, really fulfilling experience, especially if you've known them directly or worked with them directly and so forth. So it's pretty cool. What do you think about El Salvador? What do you think about life here? How do you see it? How do you view it? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it?
I think El Salvador is really interesting in terms of being a tiny country, but the relevance that it have in the global spectrum is really amazing. And I think that it's mainly because they're doing good things, specifically regarding the gangs and so on. Like it was a dream a few years ago, and they built this dreamed reality now, and that's really impactful. And you see in the optimism of Salvadorians, that's really interesting to me. And coming from a place that is full of negativity and people can plan ahead, not even few days, or plan a future or whatever, coming to a place that have this diametrical different perspective is really good for me. And also in terms of what is house life and so on, it's really good because we have similar culture. I think that maybe if I move to Chile or Peru, I won't be as good as I'm here because we kind of do the same jokes and have really similar humor. So it's really good for me. And it's really nice in terms of the hospitality of people. I think that that's one of the great things that we have here in El Salvador. And to me, it's as far as the Bitcoin project continues, as far as we can like help in any way support the success of Bitcoin here. I'm still feeling that this is a country that I want to be part of, like trying to support the change that are going to happen, and specifically if they are related to Bitcoin, they are going to be good for me too.
Awesome. Any last thoughts? Any ideas you want to get out there?
The best idea is to recall that you need to be positive in general, because obviously there are news and information that is way beyond our reach. But if you have a positive perspective of the change or the reality, you are not going to be depressed or feel betrayed, because at the end you are trying to get the best of the worst. Could be.
Awesome. That's a good way to close it off. And let's just, you're a journalist. How can people find you? How can they find your writing? What's the best way to keep up with what you're doing?
The best way to see my articles, if you put my name and Forbes, Javier Bastardo Forbes, you are going to see my profile there. And if you want to follow me on socials, mainly on X, is Crypto Bastardo, but with an I instead of a Y because it is in Spanish, Crypto Bastardo.
Cool. We'll put that in the show notes. But thank you so much for coming on. This was a fantastic conversation. It was very enlightening. It was cool to hear your story. So thank you.
Thank you.